Speaking about sex robots.
Yes.
Do you think that it is going to be basically an escape pod for men?
Funny, I saw prices. I saw you can buy the female robot that of course looks like Barbie, because I thought we dismantled her last year, but here she is.
So what would you say to someone that's on a date and they're like, what's your body count?
Fuck off. We still don't have unified definitions of what sex is. There are a lot of people who have anal sex because they want to call themselves virgins when they get married.
You were talking about how you had this nude photo on Instagram. It wasn't showing anything, but you could clearly tell that you were nude.
Yep.
And that your teenage son came to you and said, hey, all my friends saw this.
My son has seen this picture, right? And he's never brought it up until his friends brought it to him.
People will automatically conflate being in a monogamous long-term relationship as healthy and the standard, but I have talked to so many people that are in that and they either have never had an orgasm because they're not comfortable even having that conversation of what they like.
Right? People who sexed more, couples who sexed more actually have better and more sex. When men are specifically feeling shameful about their body, they are more likely to be hostile or violent towards the women in their lives.
Kaamna, thank you so much for being here. I enjoyed your speech so much here at the conference. Do you want to, I guess, give yourself a brief intro to the listeners about who you are, what you do, and why you're at the conference?
Sure. Thank you for having me. So I talk about sex a lot and all day long. I'm a sexologist. I'm a researcher. I'm a coach. And I study what I think of as the gamut of sexuality. So a lot of my work is focused on sexual shame, which is, of course, our past structures, where all, socioeconomic, political, psychological trends that bring us to where we are. And then I also study the future of intimacy. So sex and AI, VR, all that kind of stuff. And I think that right now my work is bringing me to connect those dots for people.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so shame element is massive.
Sure.
I think we hold on to that in so many areas of our life, but the thing that is glaring and then even expected from us is when it comes to sexuality. If you don't have shame around it, then there's something wrong with you.
That's very true. And I started studying shame formally because it was always in the room when we talked about sex, and at every level, at an individual level, at a relational level, even at a business level. And when we talk about sex tech, and there's a whole table of products and services down there, but most of those founders will tell you that it's been really hard to get funding because of vice clauses and things like that. And that's all part of shame, right? That's all part of our culture saying this is not right, this is not good, you got to do it differently. And I think that I'm heartened to see that people are breaking those molds. We're having conversations that we didn't have before. I think women are leading the charge because for the longest time, they've been the ones that have been the recipients of a lot of this sexual shame. But I think that we cannot leave and we should not leave the men behind. And there's much dialogue to be had. A lot of the people I coach are men for that very reason, because maybe I fall between this therapist and friend because I'm a coach. But a lot of the guys that come to me will say, I didn't know where to go. And I don't know where to go. And I think that's something that we need to solve.
What do you notice as far as the differences of how that shame is internalized or expressed between men and women?
I think the one thing we've done is given women the permission to seek help, right? Because we're the weaker sex, whatever it is, I'll take it, right? Because you're allowed to lean on your friends, you're allowed to go to the doctor, etc. We don't allow men that. So physicians will say, oh yeah, men come to me just before they, just after they've had a heart attack, just before they're about to drop dead. And it's the same thing in a sexual shame context. So when we create these spaces for them to come to, then you start hearing things like, nobody's ever asked me these questions. I've never had these conversations before. Men are not allowed to be intimate. Boys are not allowed to be intimate. We hear that a lot. I had one of my interviewees for the research that I do say to me, I had sex way before I was emotionally ready for it, simply because it's the only intimacy boys are allowed. So it's quite profound.
Yeah, and what from my reading is sex is almost more important to the man because it is such a love. It's like it's proof of the love, or it's the proof of the connection, and without it there's all of this lingering uncertainty. So when women tend to weaponize sex, that's really damaging to men. So like they'll hold it like a carrot, or they'll take it away if like they're not being a good boy, and that how bad that is for the dynamic. Yeah,
that's true, but I also think that for boys there's a performative element. It's kind of like, you're not a man if you haven't had a lot of sex, if you haven't had a lot of notches in your belt. And I think we see that toxic culture in colleges a lot, where men are just programmed. They don't buy into it necessarily, but they're just programmed to just have a lot of sex with a lot of different partners.
Mm-hmm. Do you see a lot of shame when it comes to men that, I guess, need something that's a different version of intimacy? Like they don't know how to ask their partners for that?
I don't think they know how to ask anybody for that. And I'll give you another example. An Indian man that he's not a teenager, I think he was in his 50s, that I interviewed, said to me, I don't believe in monogamy, but it's not masculine, it's not manly for a man to be okay with sharing his partner. So I'm in a monogamous relationship and I cheat a lot, right? So it's kind of like any deviation from that norm is frowned upon, and whatever that norm is, right? I mean, typically it's monogamous within the context of a marriage, heterosexual, et cetera. So any deviation out of those boxes gets us admonished and gets us to feel like we're bad people.
So there's a lot of conversation when it comes to shaming women, especially when it comes to sexuality or what we would call promiscuity. And they say that shame is actually really productive and it's there for a reason. So one example would be if you have all of these women that are now engaging in excessive sexual behavior, they raise the floor, and then you have all of these other women that may not want to participate in hookup culture, might not want to participate in something that they would consider fast, but because the culture is shifting in such a way that that's the new expectation, that they're being left behind, so it's there to protect the floor, if you will.
I think that's a bunch of bullshit, to be perfectly honest. To be really fair, first of all, I think all of those things are so arbitrary. The word promiscuous, the word fast, how many partners is right. There's no hard and fast rules. Every culture will tell you different, and every human being that is on a journey will tell you something different. And I think whenever we put these boxes around us, it's to shame someone for being too much or too little, and to put us all down to this lowest common denominator. I don't think sex should be externally referenced at all. I think it's extremely private and extremely personal. Not necessarily private, but I think it's personal and it's individualized and it's unique, and you should honor it as such.
So what would you say to someone that's on a date and they're like, "What's your body count?"
Fuck off. None of your business. I mean, it was the point, and I've mentioned it a few times, the idea of sexual maturity. First of all, somebody that asked me that question, immediately I know that there's either a competitive element here or there's a judgmental element, and I think it's unnecessary. However, without being flippant about it, I think the question you're trying to get to, or they're trying to get to, or should be trying to get to, is, what are your sexual experiences? What do you know what you like? Do you know what you don't like? Maybe the first date is the right time for it. Maybe it's not. But I would much rather have a more qualitative discussion about body count, not about the number, if that makes sense.
Right, like the wrong question is being asked.
Absolutely. What have you learned?
Right, because there's not much you're gaining from that answer.
No, it's terrible.
And then it's just practicing this retroactive jealousy. And
Absolutely. And then there's no right answer. I mean, there's no winning answer, right? Because depending on who's sitting across from you, they're going to be judging you anyway, right? Either you've had too few or too little, right? That sort of thing.
And is there anything that tells you from like a professional standpoint? Like, does a number tell you anything about that person conclusively?
I mean, like I said, I think that it shows a lack of sexual maturity, emotional maturity. I think that's a person that is still very bought into collective cultures, our common mindsets around this stuff, not someone that's willing to do something differently and think differently. I also want to point out that we still don't have unified definitions of what sex is, right? So research will still show that, yes, most of us will say it's penile vaginal. But there are a lot of people who think oral sex is sex. There are a lot of people who have anal sex because they want to call themselves virgins when they get married. So, I mean, would you push back and be like, oh, what do you mean by sex? What are we actually talking about here, right? Emotional infidelity, is that sex? So it's a difficult question.
Yeah, there you go. just throw them for a loop.
Throw it back at it. Oh, I'm a blast to date, you can imagine.
I'm sure you're doing a good job at selecting though too, like narrowing, so you're not getting like these people that are asking this question.
Absolutely.
So shame is a really interesting thing because when I think about conscious sexuality and what that looks like, it's not to be in a specific container. It's not just for marriage. Like it's it's have you uncoupled your relationship with shame and sexuality, and to me that's conscious sexuality. So can you have sex where you and your partner are doing it together, you're concerned about their pleasure, they're concerned about your pleasure, you're not worried about like if my belly looks weird in this position or my face looks weird, it's like is this bad, right? So all of that is stripped away either entirely, or you're doing the work to get most of it abolished. And people will automatically conflate being in a monogamous long-term relationship as healthy and the standard. But I have talked to so many people that are in that, and they either have never had an orgasm because they're not comfortable even having that conversation of what they like. They haven't been able to touch themselves, look at themselves. How many women have never looked at themselves because it's dirty and it's wrong? And to me, there's just, everyone has a lot of work to do when it comes to the shame element. And what I learned, what book was this? It was talking about the origin of the very first Latin word for pussy. And it was the same as shame.
Right.
Because the man is out and he's exposed. So that's pride, something that to behold. But the woman's is tucked away, so it must be dirty and wrong. So shame, shame, shame. So from like basically the first time that we started speaking, we have instilled this in every single layer, specifically for women, but men now too.
Yeah, I mean, there were so many things I wanted to just, respond to as you were talking. So first of all, what strikes me so hard is, you're in North Carolina, I grew up in India, and the experiences are the same, right? I know exactly what you said. So many couples that the woman does an orgasm, they're ashamed to talk about it, they don't know what their bodies look like, all of that kind of stuff. And at the same time, when you look at how we all got here, all these different cultures, I don't entirely know yet. So I know that in India, we like to blame everything on the British, right? They colonized us for 200 years. They're like, well, it's Victorian morality. But I don't think so. And India, remember, is the culture that gave us the Kama Sutra. And the Kama Sutra is really interesting because all these fantastical sex positions and all this real education around pleasure is meant to be in the context of a partnered relationship. So the Kama Sutra is not about go out and fuck everybody. And who cares? I don't care if you do. But the idea that you have to work at sex. You have to work to make sex interesting and innovative in a long-term relationship is thousands of years old. And yet we think that we're going to spend, 90% of our time working, 10% of our time on our spiritual development and leave there's nothing, 90+, there's nothing left for our intimate relationships. Of course we're going to be lonely. Of course we're going to be in an intimacy crisis.
So when it comes to working on that relationship with shame and just sexual exploration, do you find it easier for people to work with that by themselves initially with their partnered couple, or both?
I think I always say sexuality is an inside job. So personally, I work with individuals.
Okay.
Because I think that you get in a partnered relationship, you may get lost, and I think this work has to be done individually, and that's where the spirituality piece comes through. From there, you can spring dive into any sort of permutation and combination that you want, but I think the work has to be individual.
So where does that start? How do you start?
Yeah, so it's interesting, right? So I mean, as you said in my talk earlier, I talk about sex, shame, and spirituality, and to me, one of the most powerful ways to overcome shame is to adopt this spiritual mindset. And we have to be very clear that spirituality is different from religion, especially in the context of sexuality.
Can you decipher the difference?
So there's a framework that I like by a couple of researchers, and I'm happy to give you their names so you can reference the article even. But it's essentially, in religion is sort of community driven, right? It's upheld by the community. It's upheld by your social structures, whereas spirituality is much more individual. It is individual, it is unique, it is personalized to you. Religion is given by scriptures, right? There's the Bhagavad Gita, there is the Bible, there is the Quran, so on and so forth. Whereas spirituality is intuitive. It sort of comes from within. It's those voices, it's those messages that you get from your relationship with the universe. And then the third piece, which is a very important piece, and all spiritual philosophies around the world have this, is this idea of unification and oneness. So religion will tell you that there's a divide. There is God and devil. There is faith and or vice and virtue. There's sin and I don't know what's the opposite of sin. Not sin, sex, whatever it is, right? And the whole point of spirituality is that there is no division. I mean, if you really go into quantum learning, this is, we're all made up of energetic particles, right? The difference, what is matter and what is particle is just an illusion. So those are the three sort of tenets that I work with. So how does that apply in a sexuality content? It's like, all right, listen, you have a right to have a sexuality that is spiritual in that it is unique and individual to you. It is intuitive and driven by your own system, your own body, your own dialogue with the universe. And you are allowed to lean into oneness instead of division. Whether that means that you are willing to extend yourself and learn about a culture or a community that makes you uncomfortable because there is no division, or if you just let those boundaries within yourself fade away. And that's the work. That's the powerful work.
So how can someone get past the idea that you can't be divine and also have desire?
Well, so that's kind of thing. I mean, one of the most beautiful things I read is just when you think about sex and religion or divinity, just think about your spirit has desire. It's as simple as that, right? Your spirit. Why would this thing exist? I mean, we're talking about making a case for promiscuity or the concept of promiscuity. Why would this extremely powerful, vital force exist within you if it was meant to be weaponized against you, right? It is known across the world. I mean, in Tantra culture, it is a pathway to enlightenment. Spirituality is a pathway to enlightenment, like literally from your root chakra all the way up to your head. You gotta let the energy flow. Otherwise, you're stuck. You're stilted. So you really have to understand that and internalize it.
And then, I guess, like, let's say you grew up in a conservative house where you're taught that like your body is sinful and your desires are sinful, or even even some spirituality, it's the idea that desire is like the root of all of your suffering, right? So just because you want something, like that's the problem, so you have to kind of overcome that. So how do you start to kind of shatter that worldview with someone who's maybe had that for 15, 20 years?
I mean, I think, again, it's coming down to this. So I always tell people, I'm like, listen, if you're old enough to drive and you're old enough to vote, you are old enough to take your sexuality in your own hands, right? And there's something very simple. Something I do is something called sexual scripts, right? You just sit down, and after you work through these, you go through some of these tenets. Well, like, let me explain to you what I talk about when I talk about, sexuality and spirituality. So then you write down, let's say, 10 things that you think about sexuality, right? A sexual script is basically a story that you tell yourself. Men always initiate sex. Good girls, don't do anal, whatever it is, right? You write those things down, and then you put down next to it, whose voice is that, right? Where did that come from? And then the next step is, do I believe it? Do I want it in my life? That sort of thing. And then you slowly can start eliminating. And it's not these things are called practices for a reason. It's not an on-off switch. But I do believe that the first step is acknowledging and examining something like these scripts, and then working towards a reframe. Okay, if I'm going to take this out, what am I going to put in its place? Men don't always have to be the initiator. What does that mean? That means that as a woman, it is my responsibility, it is my privilege, it is my joy to also be an initiator. So it's a process. The fearsome part, or the fearful part for me, is you can go through your entire life without doing this work. And those are the people, I think, that end up projecting their shame onto other people the most. So not only are you yourself harmed, but you're harming potentially generations.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And I've been in such a space when it comes to my previous work where I don't have shame about it. I'm an open book.
Sure.
I made those decisions, and I stand by them. And then some people will do just that, which is they are trying to lend me their shame, and they get mad that I don't take it. I'm like, well, that's not mine. Like, your feelings are your own. And I'm sorry that I'm not going to take that on for myself, but you get to decide whether or not like you want to hold on to that. But I decided a long time ago that's not for me. And then even coming from that space where I'm like, oh, I don't have that much shame. But then I would realize I'm at a bar with some friends, and then we get into the topic of sexuality, and all of a sudden I get like really quiet. And then I'm like, wait, who's listening? I'm like, oh, well, it's still there in different ways too. Because why why am I embarrassed if like the waiter hears what
Yeah.
I'm talking about? I'm never going to see them again, and
Yeah.
it's a very human experience. So it's a weird
Yeah.
thing where it kind of can show up in a sneaky way.
Well, for sure. And remember, I said practice, right? And
Yeah.
and also we've talked about, as those of us, all of us in this industry, you have to be a little careful. You have to be a little discerning, because it's not a welcome conversation. It's not a safe conversation in every place. I mean, I'm an Indian woman that talks about sex openly, but I grew up in a big city in India that's open. But if I were doing this in a smaller town, I might be a little bit more careful, maybe less open. And I think that's okay. I think you've got to meet people where they are, while pushing boundaries in a safe, strategic, and responsible way.
Yeah, that's a really good point. When it comes to maybe unconscious ways that we could be instilling shame into like our partners, ourselves, or our kids, how do you make sure that you're, I guess, not doing that? How do you clock that and take that responsibly?
It's I think that's a tricky one, because we just talked about how shame is like it's so massive, right? It's all over our lives, and it hits so many different aspects of us. Everything from how we look, how we walk, how we feel about ourselves, how well we fuck, if we don't fuck, all of that kind of stuff, right? So I think that instead of burdening yourself with the constant, am I putting shame on people? I think working on that oneness, on that curiosity, on that lack of judgment in your everyday existence. And for some of us in this field, we're very lucky, because we have to come across that every day. Every day we have to check our biases. I mean, I do a lot of work in sex and tech, and I have to really check my prejudices when I talk about people who have sex with robots, right? And I have to check other people. So these just every day, and you don't have to be working in our industry to do this. I think every day we could do ourselves a favor by just showing up with less judgment and more curiosity, especially for kids. They're so perceptive, and they're so sensitive, and they're like sponges. And what we fail to remember with kids, I think, all the time, is that our actions speak louder than our words. And I think hypocrisy in parents when it comes to sexuality is one of the worst things we can do to our children.
So how do you approach that conversation with your kids? Like, I guess the initial conversation about sex and their body and all of the things where it can go wrong.
Yeah, I think first of all, I think one of the misconceptions is that it's just the talk, and it's not. It's a series of talks, right? It's an open dialogue. And as somebody who talks about sex for a living, I actually go the opposite route. I try not to beat them on the head with it. I mean, for God's sake, they're looking at me on Instagram and all the rest of it. But here's what I think I do know, right? And as parents, you're always second guessing yourself. But I think my kids know that I am an open and safe space for them. And that's really all I want, is that if there's something that you want to discuss, something that's on your mind, I want to be the first frontier in this space, right? You want to come and talk to me about football? I have no fucking idea. But this place I can help you with. So I think that's what parents can hope for. Kids will, people that I interview, they'll say as the bar is high, because they'll say things like, oh yeah, look, I'm a queer polyamorous person, and my parents were like, yeah, okay, we love you anyway, but they didn't want to learn anything more about it, right? And on the other hand, people are like, oh, some research will show moms try and have the sex talk, but then they talk 3 times as much as their kids. So it's not an easy thing to do, but I think the first step is acknowledging your biases, how uncomfortable you are with sexuality, and owning that a little bit, and then being willing to learn from your kids.
Yeah, it's kind of your duty to get through your discomfort.
I think so. And again, easier said than done, right? But I mean, imagine what these kids have access to now in terms of technology, and the way we're breaking boundaries around sexuality and gender and all these things. I mean, we have to learn from the next generation, because they're not, we like to think, oh, Gen Z, they're all freaks, or Gen whatever, I don't know what they're doing. They're not having sex anymore, whatever. Yes and no. They're pushing boundaries in a way our generations, or at least my generation, never did. And we have to give them that respect, and we have to give them that platform and hear them out.
Yeah, I think it's really important to listen to them. And then also, if you're not going to take that burden on yourself to have that uncomfortable conversation, like you said downstairs, someone else, it's going to be their peer, or it's going to be the internet. And both of those things are going to be a tragedy, because that peer is not, shouldn't be in a position of like orientation or leadership. They have no idea. It's the blind leading the blind. And then the internet, it's and everything and anything's there. So what they
Absolutely.
stumble upon can
Yeah.
be like a catastrophe.
And it is really sad that sex education is more a political thing than it is a fact-based scientific thing. So, we'll have a new president and suddenly you're allowed sex education and then somebody will move on and then sex education is gone. And it's just, that's really, if we could regulate it in a way and make it more consistent and make it more scientific and less arbitrary morality, I think our kids would be in a much better place.
Yeah, I agree. I think it should be scientific, backed. And then, I mean, I'm a big proponent of that's the parents' job, but I understand not all parents show up in that way, so that those kids shouldn't be left behind, because we do know that if they don't have any education, that the likelihood of teen pregnancy actually goes up. But I just really wish parents would kind of like take the responsibility of their kids back into their hands. And there's so many ways where I see them using everything as a proxy, and I get it, they're busy. Most people have to, both parents usually have to work, and they're overstimulated, they're exhausted, and if you're a single mom, like, God help you. But it's still like, what is the most important thing? And it is bringing up your child. So it's not the school's job, it's not the government's job, it's certainly not their friend's job. So you have to be like where the buck stops and just show up in that way. And I know that's hard, but it is your responsibility because you brought them here.
I think it's a collective responsibility, because I think, for instance, let's take, just for the sake of simplicity, let's take 3 major institutions that a child touches in the first 10 years of their lives, right? You got the parents, you've got some sort of faith-based organization, and then you've got school. And if there's dissonance between the 3 of them, the message gets lost. So I think each of those things, and this is where we all have to step up collectively as cultures, have to reinforce the messages that this is a natural part of growing up. Curiosity is natural. If there are resources, if you need resources, here they are. This is what we offer as communities. Right, I'll give you an example. Even how we take care of new mothers differs around the world, right? I had my first child in Australia, where you come off from hospital and then they direct you. Your 6-week checkup is not with another doctor. It's with a I forget what they're called, but it's like an early childhood clinic where a nurse meets you. It's a free service, and they offer you all the resources. So what you're signaling is, first of all, that this is not an economic endeavor. This is to make sure that as a community we take care of young mothers, because that's a fucking shit show, right?
Yes.
So if we did something similar in the sexuality context, what we'd be saying is we're giving you uniform information, and we're all reinforcing that you need to be taken care of. There are so many ancient practices that have that signal coming of age, because it's a really significant part. What do? We pretend it doesn't happen, right? We just sort of like fast track and we talk about college, and that's not doing kids any favors. That's not celebrating a new phase in your life or treating you how to treat it with honor. It's telling you that it's going to be problematic and nobody really knows how to deal with it. Go to the internet.
Yeah. I loved you were saying the opposite of shame is honor. I loved that so much.
I love that too. I actually looked up, when I was first writing this presentation, I looked up what are all the words that are the opposite of shame. And there are others. I just loved this one, particularly in the context of, because it also, to me, honor it's not so black and white. You can take your time to really get that. I think all of us who are women who put ourselves out there, we've taken our time. We've gone through a journey to really know what that honoring feels like. And I think that's important in whatever way, shape, or form.
Yeah, for me, it feels like this embodiment.
Yeah.
Right? It's like stepping into ownership of yourself.
Absolutely. And for me, it feels like pride wasn't the goal, but I'm so proud now. And I can see that I'm impacting other people simply by, the way people ask me questions in the shadows of the rooms, like at a party. Even the men will come and ask me a question in the corner. I'm like, you know what? I don't care if you have to do it secretly. I'm glad you're asking. And that's, one person at a time. That's what we can do.
So I wanted to get into co-navigating shame. So again, maybe it's not yours and it's someone significant.
Sure.
Can I share the story that you did downstairs about your Instagram post?
Sure.
Okay, so you were talking about how you had this nude photo on Instagram. It wasn't showing anything, but you could clearly tell that you were nude.
Yep.
And that your teenage son came to you and said, "Hey, all my friends saw this. Can you please take it down?" And you were like, "Let's meet in the middle, and I'll just unpin it." Basically, it was an important part of you and your expression. I perked up when I heard that because I am all over the internet and
Sure.
I know that it's counting down until I have a very similar
Sure.
situation. How do you navigate like respecting their boundaries, where they're at developmentally and where they are with shame? And then it's not even just theirs, right? It's like he said it, my friend said, so now he's taking on his. So it's all of these different layers of collective shame and still honoring yourself and your right to express and sympathizing and empathizing with him. It's just I just want to learn from someone who's a few steps ahead down the path.
You know, it's tough because that was a really hard conversation, and I'm sure it's not the first that's going to occur. And it would have, if it was an adult that brought that to me, I would be like, grow the fuck up. Like, you can deal, right? But because it's a child, and because it's my child, and because I study shame, look at the irony, right? And he's coming to me with all this shame in his entire body. Like, he even said it to me softly, Mama, can you take that? And I have the sweetest boy, right? So I'm already dying. Look, what these boys, his friends, my son has seen this picture, right? And he's never brought it up until his friends brought it to him, right? Because this picture was probably 2 years old. What those boys are doing is shaming me for being a mom and being sexy, for being maybe a certain age and putting myself out there. And I have this much patience for it, which is zero, right? Now, that being said, in the spirit of not doing harm in our work and as people and as individuals and as caretakers, I did want to meet him where it was comfortable for him. And it was a really good opportunity for us to talk about, but this is what I do, right? I help people overcome these boundaries. So literally, like, we're going to hold hands and we're going to take baby steps together. But the most important thing that I reinforced to him, and I hope he heard me, was, I'm so glad you told me. And that has to be our promise to one another, that if something bothers you about what I do, and God knows if something bothers me, I tell him, you have to bring it to me, because there's going to be more. And if it's not going to be these friends for this post, it's going to be something for something else. Like, I'm all over the news because I have an AI boyfriend, right? I'm a sexology researcher, and I'm studying the tech piece. And, that didn't bother him so much. I was like, did you see the article? Because these kids are a little bit of my target audience for this work, because they're the ones using it. They're so comfortable with technology in the way, my generation is not. And he was like, yeah, but you sound crazy because, you have a tech boyfriend. I was like, cool, I can deal with that, right? So in a way, I'm now using them to kind of test and see what the reaction is in the mainstream world so that I can combat it. I will not be shying away from it. But it's no easy feat.
Yeah, and I guess, is there a conversation too with him and how to pick his tribe? Because the way I see it too is, if you have someone that belongs in your community, that's not how we behave or treat each other.
It's a good question, but I think that to expect 15-year-old cisgender boys in cities like San Francisco to not react to my work, I honestly think that's asking too much.
I'd feel like they'd be more open than probably most places.
I think this is them being open.
Okay.
I think them just pointing it out and not really reaming him. I think that was them being open. I mean, there are lots of... I have a 13-year-old and a 16-year-old. I'm surrounded by teenagers. And I think generally... I'm going to go out on a limb here, and they're not listening to this. I suspect they're all quite proud of me. Okay. And I suspect 5 years from now, they'll be able to express it. And I'll give you an anecdotal example. On my 40th birthday, my ex-husband put together this sort of montage of words. And I noticed that from my 2 nieces that I'm very close to, and my daughter, the 3 words were whatever, and courageous and brave were the words that showed up. And I just marked it for myself. We all need that reinforcement every once in a while. But I suspect they'll be okay. Now, the caveat is, I'm an academic. Right. My body is out there in a specific context. I don't do a lot of full nudity and stuff like that. So that is a very different conversation for people, women particularly, that are doing that work. And I think that the number one thing is, you owe your children a lot, but it is still your body. It's your body, it's your choice. And obviously the world you and I live in, I think this is sacred work. So I'm going to bring you along with me, I think is the story.
Yeah. That's helpful.
It's not easy.
I appreciate you sharing.
I'm sorry. Yeah.
So when it comes to the shame or the expected shame of women of like a certain age, there's this idea that we expire like old milk after 25.
Sure.
Especially after you're no longer fertile, you
Yeah.
can't provide children, so sex is supposed to kind of be off of the table. That seems, it seems really odd, and like there's probably not a lot of historical evidence that that's the way it's always been. Layla Martin talks about this, and she says, ironically, it's the postmenopausal women that were the most sexual, and they actually were conduits, and they were using their body and letting other people use their bodies strictly for pleasure because there was no risk of pregnancy.
Right.
So they were the only women up until birth control that could actually experience sex just for pleasure. So this idea that postmenopausal women are not supposed to be sexual is it's kind of ass backwards.
Yeah, it is, because it's a whole patriarchal thing, right? About sex is for reproduction and women's job is to reproduce, and therefore, for women it's all intertwined. And I'm glad you said 25, because nobody knows what that magic number is or what the shelf life. Sometimes some places it's 25, sometimes it's 45. And I wish we could look back at ancient civilizations to see what they did, but the reality is that the life expectancy was a lot lower, right? And now we're talking about longevity, gurus want to live to be 150, and I'm like, really? And you want 70 of those years to be sexless? Like, peace out, right? I'd rather die now. So I think we have to acknowledge that the body does undergo a change, and our healthcare systems, I think, are woefully underprepared or, frankly, just prejudiced and will not answer those questions. And so you see it on both the societal side, and then you see it on the healthcare provider side, where a lot of my girlfriends in their 50s will be like, my sex life is suffering, but I'm too embarrassed to ask my doctor. It's something as simple as lube. Everybody knows that your vagina starts drying up, and it's literally something as simple as using lube or an estrogen cream, and still you have to go and advocate for yourself with a healthcare provider, assuming they even know what tools are available for them. So I think that's a big problem. I think we also have to acknowledge on the men's side that there are some changes as well. We don't talk about andropause a lot. And andropause is similar to what women experience. It's a drop in testosterone. So your libido goes down, and your muscle mass and hair loss, things like that. And when you don't know that that's just a natural progression of your body, and certainly there are things you can do to delay it or to make it feel better, then you think it's you. And then that comes back to the shame piece. And what do we know about men when they feel shame? They further isolate. And we're already in an intimacy and isolation crisis. Is this really the cycle that we want to do? And we can all get over ourselves and sit together and be like, all right, we know this is the natural progression. Let's make sure we have the right tools, the right education, the right mechanisms. It's not Viagra. Viagra is not the solution, because then it means that everybody thinks they just take a pill and they're sorted. But sexual wellness that we know has been researched over and over and over again has a multi-dimensional aspect to it. There's the physical piece, which your Viagra will solve, but there's the emotional, the mental, and the spiritual pieces that really have to come from you. And that's Gina Ogden's 4D model of sexual wellness. That I didn't make that up. So it's out there.
Yeah, and the medical piece that's so frustrating to me, it's how dismissive they are about the importance of healthy sexual function. I was on this medication when I was 19. It put me into menopause. So I was in menopause for about a year.
Wow.
And all of the symptoms that you would do if you were experiencing it naturally, like dryness, loss of sex drive, my skin went to shit, night sweats. It was really, really awful. And I went to them and specifically was talking about sex drive, and like I didn't understand why, like the dryness. Like, this is crazy. I couldn't self-lubricate if I wanted to. And they're like, oh, well, it's expected, of course. And it's not that big of a deal. It's just your sex life. And don't you want to feel better? And it's like, no, this is, especially at that age, it's such a fundamental part of your just overall wellness. And then if you talk to them about hormones, one of my friends owns a really innovative practice, shout out Gabe, Dr. Frank, but he has people coming to him saying, like MDs coming to him saying, oh, well, what you do is kind of nonsense, like hormones, that's a scam, right? And he's like, no, it's so important. So people like myself, I have to go to private practice if I want my a full panel to see where my hormones are at. nutrients, micronutrients, because the main medical community still thinks it's kind of a farce, which is a joke. So yeah, women, like, yes, you can go do hormones. That's not just for men. Find someone who's on the cutting edge of science and is really looking at these longevity and health span, lifespan protocols, because they're out there. It just sucks because now you're paying out of pocket because none of them really take insurance. But it blows my mind how dismissive and how you have these MDs that are just so uneducated and they're so stubborn and they just don't put an emphasis on this. And they've done studies with men specifically, and once they stop having sex, like, their health and their lifespan plummets. So it actually does, it takes years off of your life the moment you stop having sex.
Absolutely. I mean, it's just something very basic that sexual wellness is linked to your overall wellness. I mean, for God's sake, can we get a bumper sticker already? Like, it's basics. And yes, the people who as a 19-year-old were poo-pahing it, I mean, I think those people should be, I think they have their licenses taken away. And I'll give you another example that is so similar. I interviewed a social worker who works specifically with cancer patients, right? And all she helps them do is reconnect with their sexuality and their sexual illness. So primarily people that suffer from reproductive cancers. So prostate, ovarian, breast cancer, etc. And she said something similar, but it was so heartbreaking. She said, you know what happens? Once people survive cancer, they're like, well, you lived. So, how dare you want anything else, right? So she is out there doing all her life's work is around helping these people get back to some form of sexual wellness because it is such an integral part of who we are. I guarantee those cancer survivors, not guarantee, okay. I venture to believe that those cancer survivors that get back to some form of sexuality will lead much more fulfilled lives than those who don't.
So with the people that you've worked with and the studies that you've done, do you see a correlation between sexual wellness and overall wellness, including mental health?
Yeah, I mean, it's across the board at every level. And you also see the reverse, like you said, where people don't have it and the quality of life suffers. And there are some very, there is science around what makes good sex. And it's not this whole pressure of penetration and all that kind of stuff. It has to do a lot with the idea of bringing intimacy into your life all the time, right? Some of the studies will show that good sex is about communication, sexting, right? People who sext more, couples who sext more actually have better and more sex, right? And creativity and being adventurous. And yeah, if you're an asshole to your partner, you're very likely not going to have the most enjoyable sex life. So all of the, again, coming back to that wheel, all of these things are things you can play with. So you don't put so much pressure on the act of penetration. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And then so on the inverse with that, the relationship to shame and sexuality, repressed sexuality, denying it entirely, is there a relationship between that and violence?
So what I have studied, research that I've seen is in men, when men are specifically feeling shameful about their body in the context of sex, so penis size, gut, receding hairlines, low body mass, muscle mass, etc., they are more likely to be hostile or violent towards the women in their lives. Now, anecdotally, I've also heard comments in my interviews that echo this. So for instance, there was a gentleman that said, in my culture, it was all about how big my dick was. And the way you showed how big your dick was how badly you hurt the woman you were having sex with. So we would come back as teenage boys and use words like, I smashed her, I crushed her. And these are all, that sex and violence piece is very, very intertwined. And I'll give you one more example, and this is purely hypothetical. I haven't studied it, but India is New Delhi and Johannesburg trade off as the rape capitals of the world. I mean, of all the things to be fucking famous for, I'm embarrassed that's my country. And there's tremendous amount of sexual repression in my culture. There's a lot of shame across the board. And there are also, by the way, there are a lot more boys than there are girls because we still kill our female babies, right? There's still a lot of female infanticide that happens in parts of India. It's very fucked up. So all this to say that when you read about really violent rape that occurs in India, I can't believe that there isn't a correlation. but
Yeah.
I don't know who's studying it. I'd love to talk to somebody who is.
I'm not familiar of any formal studies, but I just kind of see pattern recognition
Yeah.
with that in across like cultures, whether it's by region or whether it's by something like a church or an institution, where you do see this thing where you deny it, suppress it, whatever, and it comes out the other side in a way that's unpredictable and often really unhealthy.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's going to be interesting to see, and this is the debate that we're all, all of us in the sex and tech world, where we're trying to see, can we use these tools to teach better behaviors, or can we use these tools to, scratch that itch in a sense, so that human beings are safer for the moment. And then we go into a whole philosophical conversation about what about the robots and what about the technology and the ethics, etc. And that's a whole other minefield.
Well, speaking about sex robots,
yes.
Do you think that it is going to be basically an escape pod for men in the future, that they are not going to want to deal with the work and effort, vulnerability of chasing a human versus something that's guaranteed? It's not going to talk back. It's they're putting a program it and they can have whatever they want whenever they want. So do you think it's going to be or add to this birth gap that we have globally, right? Like no one's having babies anymore. Do you think it's basically going to lead to our extinction in some kind of fashion?
So it's going to take a while, I think, for us to be extinct. I think that it's already happening. So sex robots are a little bit more, they're on the higher end of the technology spectrum. But right now we've got AI chatbots, right? And they're all very nice, and you can build them from scratch, and they tell you you're wonderful, and they're always there. And people do say this. I want to be very careful, because I'm a techno optimist. I think there are great uses for these technologies. Part of what I said, can we use them to teach better behaviors, etc. But yes, what concerns me now is there's a complete lack of conflict resolution or negotiation, and people will say, she's always there and she always says nice things to me, and that's not what human beings are made. That's not human relationships are made of. There is supposed to be negotiation. There's supposed to be a dynamism. There's supposed to be some sort of pushback. Let me also say that now women are also getting on this bandwagon. So it's not just for men.
Women are getting sex robots.
Women are getting, well, they're not getting the robots yet. So you can buy a sex robot now.
They're mostly, I've never seen a male robot.
They're building them. Okay. So, and for funny, I saw prices. I saw you can buy the female robot that of course looks like Barbie, because I thought we dismantled her last year, but here she is. I think it's $9,000, and then it's $11,000 for the male robot. But the difference with now with AI is that you can download an AI personality onto these robots. So we're getting closer and closer to their humanness. And the question of extinction is, TBD, right? We can replicate. We're talking about uploading our entire brains to the cloud. Do we think that we can manufacture babies in a glass, or use some sort of robot, maybe even a male robot to carry children? I don't know. The world is our oyster. The question is, are we going to do it consciously and ethically and responsibly? I don't know. It worries me. And I sit in Silicon Valley, where a lot of these technologies are being developed, and I don't see people asking enough of these questions.
I agree with you. Did you see that movie with Emilia Clarke? I don't know the name of it, but it was a futuristic movie, and it was just that no one was having babies naturally anymore. So you would get this little egg, and you carry this egg around with you. And they're like, we don't want the baby to get bored. Let's play music, which is so stupid. The baby in utero is bored. And then you would feed it this food that goes through, and it was just such a detached experience. And some people, you had the option to, but it was it was inconvenient. I don't want to be out 9 months. Your boss doesn't want you out for 9 months. Then there's recovery, and what's it going to do to my body? So everyone just opted for the easy thing.
Way,
but there are all these unpredictable things. We don't even know what consciousness is yet. And there's so much that quantumly exists between entanglement and how I affect you, and to take that experience of that connection, right? There's such, and the way that we know that there's something there is if you have surrogacy, the baby knows the difference between the moms that have provided the egg versus the mom that carried.
Interesting.
Right?
I didn't know that.
Yes, they smell, sound, and they actually have a preference for the mom that carried. So there is some kind of energetic exchange that we don't know this impact of that yet. So I often wonder, the sake of progress for progress, like what if you're just progressing off a cliff?
Yeah, well,
You know?
I mean, I think we're arrogant enough to think that we can solve all these problems. And what irritates me is we've been trying to answer questions about consciousness. Now, because we want to put them in a robot, we think we have the answer. We do not have the answer. We are, the fact that we are so flippant, I think, and again, I know I said I'm a techno-optimist and I really am, but I just think that we need to be much more, realistic about what we do not know. And I'm not saying there are certain things that are off limits in terms of what we should build, but I think there needs to be much more interdisciplinary conversations. And I think that the legalities, along with the regulatory people, along with the social scientists like us, along with the media, right now, every time I talk about sex and tech, people reference two things. They reference Her, Spike Jonze, Her, and they reference Ex Machina. That's it. Those are our templates for sex and technology. How the fuck are we going to teach people to use AI responsibly to better connect with ourselves and better connect with one another? How are we going to teach people about what sex robots can be in a positive context and to be wary of the negative ones? We can't, because we're too busy writing sensationalist movies about eggs that listen to music or whatever the fuck it is, without any real information or real documentaries. And, I'd like to put a call out to producers and people that are writing mainstream media. It's time to have those conversations. Every AI conference that I've been to, first of all, there's a robotic dog that's doing handstands. Like, okay, great. I appreciate that. But, we really need to talk about this intimacy piece, because it is people are producing things in black corners and selling them on Pornhub, and their robotics and their different versions. We have to put the conversation on a mainstream stage. Sorry, this is my soapbox. It drives me bananas, and I'm concerned. I'm really concerned.
No, I agree. And I tend to look at Japan as a model, because they seem to be a decade or so ahead of us when it comes to that. You have like these young men that are marrying their robots or their dolls. And I just wonder, it's like, is this ultimately going to be good or bad? Because it seems to reinforce the disconnect between human to human.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at those studies, and I've read those anecdotes as well, they all come down to the same thing. It's these men saying, I was rejected and I'm lonely, and she's nice to me and she's here all the time, and maybe we could all stand to be a little nicer to one another, for sure. And I'm very sympathetic to lonely people who haven't been able to get a date, or if you have a disability and you can't work in a certain way. That's why I'm saying I think there are great uses and use cases. And I do see a world in which this is integrated. And what we're talking about in terms of, robots taking over and, lacking all human, I think that's still ways away.
Yeah.
But right now, we have to take the opportunity to educate people so that we can integrate properly.
Yeah, I think it's self-auditing too, right? So if it's a much different example, but if you use women with vibrators, it's been around for a lot longer. It's more accessible. They're very affordable. Right? Like the barrier to entry is basically null. There are some women that might use that as a means to not be with their partner, or when they try to compare their partner to the toy, which is never a good idea, because they're very different things. One's battery operated. But it's like, you just have to constantly self-audit and say, like, am I overdoing this? Am I using this as a means of escape or avoidance, or, and just kind of reel it into a healthy level to where you can play with this thing occasionally, and it's a great supplement. Maybe it like adds to your relationship with your partner, because there are cases where you can do that. So just like constantly being honest with yourself and how you're using the tool. Absolutely. And even, to come back to that technology piece, I mean, I've heard of, you can have a hologram in your room if you want to have a threesome. I think that's great. Right. It's a beginner conversation before you bring in a real person. I think there are lots of ways to do it. But you're right, the honesty piece. And if we pull out the shame piece, because of so much of our energy is battling out within ourselves. Should I be doing this? Have I masturbated too much? Is this toy too big? Should my child know that I have a vibrator in my drawer? All this shame crap. If we can actually remove it, then we can come to those conscious pieces and really be like, I'm not ashamed of my sexuality. Now, how do I optimize it? How do I make it most fulfilling for all aspects of me, my soul included? Yeah, hear, hear. Can you tell the listeners what you're working on, how they can support you, where they can follow you? This has been amazing. And thank you again so much. No, thank you. Gosh, we covered a lot. We sure did. Well, you can find me on Instagram at Kaamna Live, kaamnalive.com.
I am going to be launching my own podcast soon because I like to talk deep and I love this conversation. So that's coming up at the end of the year. And there's going to be a book coming out in 2025. So yeah, just follow me on everything. I'm on LinkedIn as well. And I'd love to connect.
Yeah.
And thank you, Candice, for having me.
Amazing. Anytime. Thank you, everybody.